Hello, everyone. Welcome to the inaugural Duke Asian Alumni Alliance Symposium. My name is Jack Jung, Trinity Class of 2011, and the DAAA Vice Chair of Student Affairs. I'm filling in today for our wonderful national co-chairs, Aruna and Madhavi, who unfortunately could not join us this evening. Our alliance was launched only 2 years ago with the mission of building a unified Duke Asian American community and providing opportunities for their social, personal, and professional development by engaging with alumni, students, staff, faculty, and their surrounding communities. In our 2-year tenure, more than 1 year of which was during the pandemic, we have accomplished a lot. Our community continues to grow and remain strong, with over 20,000 alumni from over 50 countries and 5 established regional chapters here in the US. Our board of directors and engaged alumni have been overwhelmingly supportive of each other during these challenging times. As a community, we're proud to say that we've been able to effectively support student programming, like this year's Breaking into Hollywood webinar, and alumni programming, like last year's webinar on the impact and ramifications of the coronavirus and the global virtual happy hour this year. We stand in solidarity also with our fellow Duke affinity groups to support anti-hatred movements. Indeed, I think it's very auspicious that President Biden signed the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act into law this morning on the day of our symposium. As our mission states, effective programming and networking is critical to DAAA success. Our programming committee, led by Debbie Chang, has been working tirelessly all year to put together this incredible experience for you. Our co-sponsors, Duke's Office of Alumni Engagement and Development and Duke Entertainment, Media, and Arts Network have also generously supported and contributed to this program. So we're delighted that you have joined us this evening and given us some of your precious time today. Thank you. Thank you for that. And now let me hand this off to Debbie for an introduction of our program and the keynote speaker.
Thank you, Jack. Hi, everyone. My name is Debbie Chang, Fuqua 99 and Programming Chair for DAAA. Today is going to be such a treat for all of us. Over the next 3 hours, you'll meet a wide range of alumni, different graduation years, different areas of expertise, different industries, and we will listen to their stories and use them to inspire each and every one of us to help us better pave our own paths to success. That's why leadership events like this one are so valuable. They help us learn from each other. What issues are we coping with as individuals, family members, business leaders, and members of the communities? How do we educate ourselves, and who are the best teachers? What actions should we take inside and outside our communities to stand up for ourselves and each other? We're fortunate to have many advocates of our community speaking today, starting with our keynote speaker, Deborah Liu, Duke Class of 98, and the president and CEO of Ancestry.com. Deb will be joined by her Duke classmate, Sanyin, Executive Director, Coach K Center on Leadership and Ethics at Fuqua School of Business. Sanyin is a top-ranked executive coach and mentor and helps leaders and their teams to reframe, reimagine, and reinvest. Her work includes coaching CEOs and their successors, working on board executive team relationships and director dynamics to maximize board effectiveness. Now, some additional background on our keynote speaker. Named to the Glow House A100 list, which honors the most impactful Asian and Pacific Islander leaders, and one of the Business Insider's most powerful female engineers, Deb has worked in the tech industry for over 18 years. As a senior executive at Facebook, Deb created and led Facebook's marketplace, where millions of people buy and sell from one another. Prior to Facebook, she spent several years in product roles at PayPal and eBay, including leading the integration between the two products. In March 2021, Deb joined Ancestry as president and CEO and a member of the company's board of directors. Actively involved in promoting diversity and women in tech, she is the founder of Women in Product, a nonprofit which connects and supports women in the product management field. Deb serves on the board of Intuit, and she is a seed investor and advisor to several startups. We're so honored to have Deb join us to this inaugural symposium and can't wait to hear her talk about her path to success. Welcome, Deb.
Thank you so much, Debbie. I really appreciate you sharing a little bit about my background and for welcoming me here in this inaugural event. You know, I get a lot of questions around what it takes to be successful. How do you build a great brand? How do you influence? What should people do to kind of build their followers? Or how do you get people to recognize you more? My advice is always the same. Don't build your brand. Instead, find your voice. So what is the one word feeling that you have for who you are? That is something that we're going to talk a little bit about today. And so can you forward the slide, please? So right now there's here we go. What is the one word feeling you have for yourself today? As we talk about a brand, it's really about usually a feeling that it leaves you with. And so we'll go to the next one, which is, how do you feel when you see this logo? What are you thinking? What comes to mind? Platform, developers, PCs? The next one tells you something a little bit different. Maybe it's design or innovation. And the next one, do you think thirst? I remember this brings back memories of a hot day in the South, especially when I was at Duke, drinking an ice cold Coke and thinking the word refreshing. Or the next one, which is the joke we used to have when we were back at Duke, which was, you still called everything a Coke, even if it were a Pepsi. Beyond that, there are feelings you have about companies that have come and gone. Yahoo being sold again. It used to be synonymous with search or mail or auctions. But today, search is actually occupied by Google, which is our next logo. And if you think about it, the word that you associate with something evolves over time. The last two are two that you might be familiar with. One is McDonald's, which is, what is the feeling that you get? Is it consistent, fast, easy? And finally, In-N-Out, maybe delicious or fresh. Why do you feel this way? Why do you have this evocation of a feeling just from looking at a single logo? And that's the question that I have for you today, which is why. If you go to the next slide, you'll actually see a logo that many of us are very familiar with, which is Disneyland. Disneyland evokes a feeling, and I will put together the slide. You can see the next one, which is, what is the feeling when you get it? This is what they hope you'll feel. This is about fireworks, parades. It's about amazing rides. But having brought my kids to Disneyland many times, the reality is really, really different. The reality on the next slide is actually lines, long lines, hot, cranky kids, crowds to no end. When I was graduating from school, I actually had a friend who received an offer to be part of the Disney Imagineering team. He ended up not taking it, but he told me all the behind the scenes as he was talking to them. And he said, Imagineering was really about hiding the negative experiences and emphasizing the good ones. Later, I actually took a marketing class, and one of the marketing guest speakers talked about how Disney goes out of their way to show in their commercials fireworks, parades, kids having fun. So you remember only the good things about your trip there. But the reality is so different. It's the hot days, the expensive food, it's the long lines. And part of their brand is to make you remember the good and obscure the reality, making you remember it as the happiest place on earth, not the place where you spent 80% of your time with kids complaining. But people are not brands. And that's the difference. It's tempting to think that you need a word, something that defines you, something to put your best foot forward. But a brand is about a feeling, about a product or service. It's often to obfuscate parts of what the brand is, not because Disney is not a wonderful place, but it's not something that you want to remember every part of. But people are not brands. They're multifaceted. And so rather than building a brand, instead, find your voice. Really find the voice so that you can connect. This is an image of me speaking at the F8 event. Thousands of people sat in front of me, and tens of thousands watched it was live streamed as I announced new products every year on Facebook platform. It is a photo that's a projection of power and strength, but the reality of my life is so much different. In fact, it's much closer to the next photo, which is a photo of my family. These are my kids, 14, 12, and 9. And this is a photo we take in our photo corner. We call it our photo corner, but it's actually the front of our pantry because it is literally the only part of our house that's completely uncluttered. Imagine having spent 15 months in our house, what it looks like today. So here's the question for you. What is my brand? Is it about this projection of power, or is it the reality of what my day is actually like? The thing is, when you kind of cultivate a brand, it's artificial. It's something that you're trying to project onto other people, but it doesn't come from a place of vulnerability and necessarily truth. And so when I ask you who you are you really? The reason people actually can't be reduced to a few words is the brand about people is so many things. On the next slide, we ask that question, who are you? You are a list of things, nouns, a consultant, an engineering student, an M.B.A. candidate, co-founder of a nonprofit, maybe CEO of a company, a wife, a mother, a sister, a friend. But your voice is something completely different. And I learned to find my voice the hard way. I was born in New York City, the child of immigrants. And after my dad actually was discriminated against and they didn't give him an engineering role, he had actually had a technician role and they refused to honor his engineering degree. My parents decided to pack us up and move to a state I had never heard of, South Carolina. So when I was 6, I found myself in a state with fewer than 1% Asians. Being constantly told to be going back to where you came from, or what are you? I learned to stay quiet. I learned when people egged our house and threw rocks at our window to stay as quiet and to avoid censure. I hid from being Asian American and pretended that if no one noticed, they wouldn't comment. If I stopped drawing attention to myself, I learned to quiet that voice. If you can go back a slide, please. I went to Duke to study engineering, where being quiet and unassuming served me really well. I loved that there was so much to learn and so little demanded of me to speak up and to be out there. I enjoyed the solitude of building, of learning on my own or being in study groups. But the thing that takes you to success, to where you are, will someday stop working for you. And after I graduated from Duke, that's when it happened. What served me well to get to a level of success at Duke actually failed me when I went into the workforce. Because I graduated and I got a job at Boston Consulting Group. I struggled because even though I was a very good analyst and a pretty good slide writer, I just didn't get it. I had a really hard time really understanding what the work was about. And the only feedback I ever heard was I needed to speak up, I needed to influence, I needed to stand up for myself, I needed to actually find my voice. And I thought the work stood for itself. If I just worked hard enough, if I just turned in the right assignments, if I just got the right grades, that it would work out. But it didn't, and I could not figure out why. I went on to Stanford to get my M.B.A, and I took a class called Organizational Behavior, and I learned what to do differently. It talked about how organizations reward people who stand up, who are vulnerable, who are open. It talked about how to influence. And in my final exam, they asked one question that was the second to last question in the whole exam. And it was, what are you going to do differently because of this class? And that's when I decided I was going to learn to speak up, that I was going to find out who I was going to share that and live authentically. And that's what brought me to where I am today. This is who I am. I learned that each time I step into the room, I'm given a chance to leave an impression, good or bad. Whether through my words, my actions, my body language, I'm saying something about myself, even unintentionally. When people ask me who I am, it's often a list of facts. And in fact, Debbie actually shared a lot of those facts. Yeah, CEO, founder of Women in Product, mom of 3. I'm a writer. I'm writing a nonfiction book. I completed 2 fiction books that may never see the light of day. I'm a coach. I'm a mentor. I'm on the board of companies. I advise companies. But your voice is not about these nouns. They're not a list of who you are, but it's what you think, what you believe, what influence you have. It's about vulnerability and openness to your struggles. It's about sharing not the perfection or the resume, but truth and authenticity. So when I ask you again, what is the one word feeling? What is the one word feeling you get for you? There is no one thing that encapsulates a person. In fact, you're more than one word. And so every time you walk into a room, you leave something of yourself behind. If you focus on your brand, you're often trying not to show the real you. You're trying to fit into a mold. You're hiding. You're hiding the long lines, the cranky kids, and you're hiding who you are, and people won't be able to connect with you. I took a class at Stanford called Touchy Feely. It's a super famous class. And I learned that I closed myself off. Everyone told me, we just don't know how to reach you. We don't know how to connect with you. And I was really unable to open up. And so instead, I realized that I was trying to maintain what I learned my whole life, which was I was trying to protect myself. If people couldn't get in, then they couldn't comment. If I didn't comment on the fact, if I didn't show that I was Asian, if I didn't speak Chinese in front of other people, if I didn't eat different food, maybe they would never notice. I had learned that lesson the hard way. And I had projected this facade, and I realized that worked until it didn't. And I realized that my voice really needed to be heard and I needed to change. And so this is the journey that I went on. The next 3 slides actually are questions that I ask myself before I walk into a room. What do you want people to feel after speaking to you? A lot of times we're really focused so much on what we're saying, not what the other person is receiving. We're speaking from inside of our own head, not hearing what they're hearing. By talking to your audience, not through the lens of insecurity, you can learn to connect and actually be vulnerable. Don't think about the words you're trying to say. Think about the feeling you want people to walk away with. The second question is, what are you saying about yourself as you speak? Every day, every action, there's actions behind it. If you look down at the table, maybe you're unsure. If you're shaking your leg while you're talking, maybe you're anxious or maybe you're upset. I remember a meeting with somebody, and I had an open door policy for 7 years where anybody could set up time and meet with me for 15 minutes. And I still continue that to this day in my new role. And one woman came to me and she said, I don't know, I'm a contractor and I can't convert to full time and I don't know why. And I said, she had been with the company for a while, but as a contractor. And I said, well, tell me about what it's like when you ask your manager how to convert. And her manager was a full-time worker. And she said, I don't know. I tell her, I'm doing a good job. I have all this impact. And she kept listing all the things she did. And I said, how about this? I will pretend to be your manager and we'll take a video of us having a conversation. And so we did. And then I showed her the video. She looked at it and she realized she didn't make any eye contact with me. In fact, she was looking at the table and her voice was so low, I could barely hear the words she was trying to say. And her response was, now I understand. Her goal was what made her comfortable, not what the other person was receiving. And she was speaking volumes, not through her words, but through her actions, even though she actually had done the work. And so I think sometimes we get in our own heads and we are saying things about ourselves as we're speaking without actually saying the words. And we don't realize that we're projecting our voice in a negative way without even understanding it. And the last question I ask is, what is the story I'm trying to tell? As I said, every time you are in a conversation, you're telling a story about yourself. Just like I can tell you 2 stories about ancestry. I can tell you 2 very truthful statements, and you can tell me which one resonates with you more. I could say we're a company that helps you build a family tree. And that is absolutely true. That is what we do. Or I can tell you that we want to be a place where everyone can discover, craft, and connect over their family story. That we want to help you build a legacy to capture your grandmother's stories, to find out where you came from and where you're going. Which statement is more impactful, even though both of them were equally true? How you tell your story, the narrative, what you open about is actually very impactful to what the other person receives. And so I have this statement I tell people and I coach them, which is, what is the story you tell yourself? Do you think you're an imposter? Do you think you're too loud or too soft, too casual, too cold? Are you too assertive? Or what are you trying to restrain? What are you trying to say and project? Because the problem is that the story you're telling yourself in your head is actually the story you're telling about yourself and projecting to other people. On the next slide, it tells you that how you exhibit your behavior is actually showing up in your words and your action. So if you're trying to protect your brand, you're probably not vulnerable, open, you're closed, and you miss the opportunity to connect. That story that's playing in your head where you're trying to say, maybe if I were just a little softer, maybe if I just pushed a little harder, that's adjusting the story you're projecting about yourself. But when you're closed and you're trying too hard to protect your brand, you're missing the opportunity to make that connection. And it's your voice that actually creates that connection. It opens you up to be criticized, but it opens you up to connect. When I joined Facebook 11 years ago, I was one of the only moms in the company. In fact, for many years, I was the only mom product manager in the whole company. And I was really worried about how people would judge me, because many of you who've read about maternal bias knows that it's one of the most difficult biases to overcome. People think moms do not take their job seriously, do not work hard enough, are really focused on their family. And so I was pretty worried, because back then we used to friend every single person we met after we met with them in a meeting. And I posted a lot of things about my kids. And so I worried about what people would do when they judged me negatively. So few people had children back then, and the company was very, very young. Eventually, I decided, I wasn't going to hide that part of myself. I wasn't going to be that person where I was less than. And so I decided that I was going to share who I was through something we called #MommySchool with my kids. It eventually became a comic strip, which we publish under mommyschool.net if you want to check it out. The funny thing was, so many people, especially non-parents, told me they connected with me because of Mommy School. Not because, I thought it was because I was an amazing, competent leader, but no, actually, they thought it was really funny that I shared the funny things my kids said. And so the thing is, connection is more important than commonality. It's authenticity and vulnerability. It's finding common ground. And connection is about two people, not just one. And so as you go forth from here, learn to tell your story, learn to be vulnerable, learn to be open, learn to connect. Finding your voice means opening yourself up, even if it's to criticism. But telling your story and having people learn about it will open you up to so many more possibilities than you ever imagined. Thank you. I'll bring on Sanyin and we will have our conversation.
Oh gosh, Deb, it's so good to be here with you. So for the audience, Deb and I, we were dorm mates together in Roundtable. And did you ever imagine that all those late night conversations in our dorm rooms? And also, I remember in DC, whenever you visit from BCG, you would crash at my place. When I'm visiting San Francisco, I'd crash at your place. We've seen each other grow up in our careers. And did you ever imagine then that we will be here? It's wonderful, isn't it?
It's incredible. I mean, we have been friends for so many years, and we've watched each other go through a lot over our lifetimes and our careers. And I just remember how much it's been an honor to have you as a friend and also as a coach personally as well.
Well, I continue to learn so much from you. And so it's a mutual admiration society. So I love everything that you're saying about finding your voice, because one thing I know is we don't see ourselves clearly. And so we need that connection in order to find our voice and to tell our story. But then there's also this aspect of how much are we willing to reveal about ourselves, right? It's that vulnerability piece, which is actually the key to connection. So one of the questions that just came in is, all right, let's dive down deeper into how do we tell our story? What are the, what recommendations or best practices because it took you to get to this point. It's filtering and editing and figuring out what is the thing you want to reveal about you. So how do you do that? Take us through that.
Well, I think for so long I was so closed because of the way I grew up, right? It was just easier to kind of hide who I was, because maybe no one would notice that I was Asian. Maybe people would stop criticizing or, making racist comments. And so I just learned to hide so much of myself that when it came time to even reveal anything, people always said, like, you're really hard to get to know. And people say that because they can't connect with you. I was not a warm person. It's really funny because, it's so many people told me, like, you just lack the warmth to be a leader. And as a woman, by the way, and I'll say this especially for women and especially with people of color, you're expected to exude an amount of warmth to drive connection. And if you don't, it actually is very costly to your career. And I think that's really hard. It was really hard for me to understand that. It seems so unfair because we have these hard skills. We're taught that these hard skills matter. And I see this question from somebody who said, how much is this intellectual cognitive skills? Like, I graduated with honors from Duke and I did not do great in consulting. Like, I was okay, but here's the thing. Like, I graduated valedictorian in my high school. I graduated with honors from Duke, and I just could not figure out how to function in the workplace because it's no longer about getting the A. It's no longer about taking the test. It's no longer about the problem sets. It's no longer just powering through. That so much of the workforce is not about hard skills, it's about soft skills. And the difference between success and failure, as you know, as a coach, is that soft skills are actually the 20 to 50% that takes people much, much further than the hard skills. Lots of people have the hard skills. The soft skills are actually where you're going to succeed or fail.
I love that you highlight that, and I couldn't emphasize that more because everyone who's in this session, Dookies, super smart, our identity is around super smart. And one thing I've discovered is, my heart starts palpitating every time I go into a meeting with a bunch of PhDs or, a bunch of CEOs, and I have to tell myself, don't try to be smart, be human. And I think that's what we're talking about here. And I love how you said we're also multifaceted. So there's a judgment call here. When do we bring out which stories about ourselves? And that involves really listening to the other person to understand.
Well, imagine you wanted your brand to be intelligence or competence.
Yeah.
Think about who is most successful. Is it just the most competent person, or is it someone who can really connect? Somebody who you can understand, someone you would be willing to follow. Think about, you don't necessarily just pick the smartest person and say, I want to follow them. It's somebody who's empathetic, who understands. And I think we forget that. And so often when we are protecting our brands, we forget that it's actually, we want to follow people who are human. We want somebody who's failed, someone who's willing to share their story, somebody to say, hey, I didn't always have all the answers. Hearing I don't know from someone who you're willing to follow is so powerful. And I think often we have this thing where it's like, all these people are supposed to have all these answers. All these leaders are supposed to not be vulnerable. But it's actually that vulnerability that helps us all get better at what we do and helps other people want to follow us.
And we're in a place in the world where there's so much uncertainty. Things are so complex. No single person has the answer. So why not create that environment to bring others along? Now, there's so much in your presentation that is about connection with others. So let's talk about that a little bit. So part of the beauty of being with the Duke community is that we don't have to go at it alone, right? So to the students who are listening, to the fellow alums, what advice would you give for how do we build those deeper connections with others so that we can be more resilient together?
I hate the word networking, by the way. Mm-hmm. I actually think that rather than framing it as networking, because it feels very selfish, right? You're networking to get something out. But actually building community and networking are the same thing in a different form. And I think a lot of times we sort of write this story in our head. It's like networking bad, building community good. And so we need to find ways to do that. How do we lift each other up? How do we create opportunities for each other? And there are people like, from our days at Duke where we're still friends after this many years. It's been 20 years since we've been there, can you imagine? And, we still connect and we still help each other. And, these are the opportunities that, these are the people who are going to help you, or your classmates, your friends, but also people in the community that reach out. I was reached out to by the Duke Alumni Association to help as we build out a product management program, something I was really passionate about, something that my husband and I are excited to fund. And I hope that product management at Duke will continue to be successful, and it would be something that we can create a discipline around. But, they reached out because I was part of that community and I care a lot about the issues and I want to bring more women and minorities into the industry. And so, that is a community I'm part of. And it's those types of things, finding the places where you have something in common and where you can connect, and then actually amplifying that.
Yeah, it's authentic. And, if there's one key takeaway from what you just said is influence is actually built on relationships, not transactions, right? Yeah. Influence is built on relationships, not just the, what do you want? What can I do for you? But more being there for the good times and also the bad times and throughout, and has to be authentic. So there's a lot of questions I'm seeing here that is also about, let's talk about our race, being an Asian in corporate America today. So one of the questions is, one of the biggest challenges, as you described about your South Carolina childhood, is the struggle between assimilation and then also this preservation of our respective heritages. If you're like me, we've all probably been sent to Chinese school, right? And we definitely both enjoy food from our from our cultures. So how do you respond to this balance, to this challenge?
So I wrote this article a few years ago, and it was actually called "Finding My Voice as an Asian American Leader." It's in quotes if you want to look it up. But I wrote this article, and the reason I reference is I shared it with a woman I really respect, who's a leader in diversity, and she was helping me with a lot of these articles that I was writing. And she said, I read this article, and it reads like assimilation. And I sat on the article and I didn't publish it for a long time. And I thought about what she said and how it hurt. Because the article was about how Asian style of leadership is collective. And American leadership looks completely different than the collective cultures that our parents, my parents are like, put your head down, work really hard, people will recognize it. And then you get into the work world, you realize that is not how it works in America. That, people who are CEOs do not look like people like us. And I didn't know what to do with that. I really struggled. And so I wrote this article to talk about that kind of dichotomy between what I learned, the culture that I grew up in, and the expectation of leadership in America. When that person said, what you're describing is assimilation, it really hurt. And I had to really think hard about what I was going to do about it. And I decided, and I wrote her back and I said, hey, I understand what you're trying to say. However, I choose to see this as adaptation, not assimilation. Why don't we take the best of what we've learned in our culture and bring it to the style of leadership in America? But, if we just say, what, this is the style of leadership we grew up with, this is what our parents expected, we will never do anything to adapt. We will never be successful in this country either. And so just like we adapt when we get to college, it's very different than high school, and we adapt when we go into the workforce, I think we as leaders need to continue to adapt to what the expectations are. Do I think it's fair? Absolutely not. But women, for example, are not considered leaders unless they're warm, but men are considered leaders whether they're warm or not. Do I think that's fair? Absolutely not either, as a woman who personally is not very warm. But at the same time, if we choose not to adapt, we don't choose to, it's like saying, well, we're expected to kind of have the eyesight that we had when we were born. No, we get glasses. We try to make our lives better. We have contacts. And so I do think it is really important for all of us to really think about using the word assimilation not as a weapon against each other, but to talk about how we honor our heritage and honor our truth without losing what makes that special. My kids are all in Chinese school. My husband is from North Carolina, and he's Chinese as well. He's Chinese American. And, we raise our children to honor the heritage, but we also teach them what it takes to be a leader, what it takes to speak up in our culture here in America, because this is where they're growing up. They are Asian American. Emphasis on the American.
And actually what you just said there about, we actually have to know who we are, which is a key part of your presentation. Know who we are and then adapt to the context, but we never lose our core values. And if you are an introvert, don't try to be an extrovert, right? Like this applies not only in terms of our culture, but in terms of just how we are different and being able to celebrate our differences. And by the way, one of the leadership trends that we're seeing is it is moving towards that of the more empowering, inclusive, collective leader, right? Because the world is so complex now. So command and control doesn't cut it anymore, right? And by the way, Deb, you've always been a very, very warm person to me. And so everyone knows, we have a few friends who didn't know, I have a few friends who didn't know Deb. And when they started working at Facebook under her group, I said, well, how is it? And they said, oh my gosh, working for Deb is such a dream. And so I don't know where the comment about lack of warmth come from, but you've always been able to project deep caring. There's a drive and a unstoppable force of nature, but it's always under this very human and deeply caring person. So I want to just make sure you don't walk away without knowing that, Deb. Let's see. So other great questions. Ooh, let's talk about ancestry, because one of the vision you have for ancestry is that it's ancestry for everyone. So the question is, how difficult is it for ancestry to identify the heritage of Asian Americans when so many Asian Americans come from backgrounds where the family records are incomplete, in non-English or non-English languages? So I know this is part of your vision. So share that with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is something that we're working on. I mean, obviously, like we have amazing records from Western European countries that we built up over the 3 decades the company's been around. But I do want to make sure that Ancestry is available to everyone. One of the things is it's more than 80% of people in America say that they care about learning more about their heritage and their family. And so there's a huge market for this, but at the same time, I think sometimes we say, well, what is actually doable? And so I want us to dream big and think big about how do we actually make, heritage and documenting your heritage and capturing stories from your grandparents more accessible to everyone. And so that is part of the journey that we're on, which is helping everyone to be able to tell their family stories.
I love that. And let's pivot a little bit back to a question that is about connection. So none of us got to where we are by ourselves. Other people paved the way. We have, supporters, cheerleaders, people who invested in us, mentors. How do we honor our mentors? How do we keep in touch with them? How have you kept in touch with your mentors?
Well, I think first and foremost, as you said, so nobody goes alone. And I think you read these stories of the solitary hero. That is not true. Like for every successful story, there's a large group of people to make sure that that person is successful. People have helped along the way that often are written out of the story. And so part of it is really reminding ourselves, actually thanking the people who made a difference in your career along the way. One thing I did for my own mentors and sponsors was actually wrote an article about how much they touch my life, which they were really surprised about. But, it's interesting that you don't know the lives that you touch until, somebody comes later and says, I remember as I was leaving Facebook, I got all these messages like, you remember that time you said X that really changed the course of my career? And I was like, I don't actually remember. And what it reminded me was we are actually changing people's lives in small ways. It's like 2 atoms that hit each other. Like you don't know which direction it's going to go from there, but it's powerful, and that you can make people's lives better or worse just having been there. And so I want to remember all those people who actually set me on the strong trajectory. I wrote an article recently, so I have a Substack that I publish every week. And one of them was tough feedback that I've received from people. And some of the feedback was pretty harsh. And I shared it with the people who, some of them are tagged in there. And it's really important that, they saw that the work that, the words that they said had profound meaning and actually changed the course of my career. And I think often we just don't thank people or remind them or pay it forward. And I think they would really appreciate that.
You said something in there that if we flip it around, because the small moments matter. And if we speak up, if we never speak up, we can't make that impact, right? But so think about that contractor that you talked about earlier. If you had just said, oh, just keep at it, keep doing, but instead you listened and you spoke up in a way that was authentic to you. Let's take a video and watch, and you ask questions. That changed her life, right? Because you held a mirror up to her face, right? So part of what we're hearing here, everyone, is finding your voice. We are not defined by the nouns. We're defined by our actions in the big moments and also in the small moments. And small moments matter. Speaking up even in the small moments matter. So now that you are this grand, wise, you've always been grand and wise, Deb, but at this stage in your career, if you could provide one piece of advice to our current alums seeking success in any industry, what would that piece of advice be?
The thing that I tell people, and I always remember this from when I was coming out of school, which was someone who has a learning mindset will always exceed someone who has a fixed mindset. That if you learn, you're better at learning than everybody else. You will always get better every single day, and eventually you'll exceed the best experts. And I think we kind of have this idea, it's like everyone else is smarter than us, they're better than us. And I actually choose to have a learning mindset in everything that I do, because look, this is my first job as a CEO. But this is the first time I've done many things over the years, right? I actually ended up running an engineering team. And by the way, I coded in Fortran when I was there at Duke. And that was the last time I coded. And my engineers would make fun of me because they're like we haven't even heard of that language. I'm like, It was gone before many of you were born. And I think as you think about, what it takes to be successful, it's being able to adapt and learn faster than everybody else. It's being able to force yourself out of your comfort zone. I think it's easy to kind of get inside your own head and say, well, I don't know how to code. How do I run an engineering team? But success in life is not about being the expert at everything. It's about learning and adapting faster than everybody else. And so I encourage all of you, focus, look, it's great to have the hard skills, but it's those soft skills that actually make the huge difference.
So Deb, reveal a little bit more of yourself to us. What are you learning about now?
I'm learning so much as in this role. I mean, part of it is, I've never run a finance department, HR, like a lot of those decisions in companies aren't run by the GMs. They're actually, centrally organized. Like the general counsel reports to me. I've learned a lot about that experience. My husband's a general counsel of a startup, so he gives me lots of advice. But I think it's really learning to learn. And it's learning to assimilate new information constantly and being able to adapt. And I think that that's really critical.
This is wonderful. So in summary, don't think about oneself as brand, but think about oneself not as nouns, but as the actions that we take and the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. And in turn, that will give people a sense of also how we reveal ourselves and how they perceive us, right? And then to always speak up, but do it in a way that's authentic to you. There's so many different modalities now. That's beautiful. 3, never stop learning, because learning is what gives you your success, what powers one's success. And then lastly, never forget about the power of community, because none of us got here on our own. So we have to celebrate and honor that. But in turn, we have to continually have a responsibility of paying it forward, such as you're doing now in sharing your time and wisdom with all of our, in this DAAA inaugural symposium. So thank you so much, Deb.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here. It's wonderful.